Not a fan of long cast times? Prefer to get up close and personal with your foes? Want a resource gauge that lets you emulate your student loans? Well, Red Mage might just be up your alley. These magical DPS are typically relegated as the Jack of All, Master of None in other Final Fantasy games. In 14, however, they're a solid damage dealer with strong party utility and an easy-to-learn rotation. Plus, on top of that, they have some of the classiest outfits in the business. This video here is to teach you about the lore and the playstyle of these fancy casters. That being said, this is meant to serve as more of an introduction to the basics of the job. If you're looking to optimize or elevate your gameplay to the next level, then this video might not be for you. So without further delay, let's jump into it. Red Mages are an offshoot of the Black Mages of Mach and the White Mages of Amdapor, who, up until the 6th Umbral Calamity, were engaged in a bloody war. In the aftermath of said calamity, survivors of both factions were forced to settle down in the mountains of Gurabanya in order to survive. Recognizing that there wasn't any point to fighting each other anymore, the mages decided to set aside their differences and instead start working together. Knowing full well that their respective schools of magic would drain the surrounding land of ether, the mages decided to combine the two into one unified school instead, one that would draw ether directly from the user's own body. This would come to be known as Red Magic, and thus were the Red Mages born. But I think that's enough history for now. I think it's about time we take a look at what Red Mage excels at, as well as a little bit of what it struggles with. Well, to start with, the Red Mage rotation is actually pretty simple. In fact, right out the gate at 50, you'll have the majority of your basic rotation available right away. This will give you a pretty good feel for how the job plays fairly early on, meaning you'll have a better idea of what to expect as you begin to take into higher level content. Speaking of higher level content, a big part of what will make Red Mage attractive to play as well is the sheer amount of party utility they'll bring to raids. Between buffing the party's damage, reducing the damage they take, and being able to resurrect fallen party members on a dime, it's small wonder why they've received the nickname Prog Mage. And to top it all off, while summoners might still run laps around them, Red Mages actually do have some pretty good mobility. Dual cast allows for a lot of wiggle room with repositioning and movement, and they also have a gap closer and a disengage should they ever need them. That all being said, the job is not without its own flaws. While starting with most of your rotation can be nice, this does mean the job doesn't really change a whole lot from 50 to 90. While that's not to say you'll get absolutely nothing to add to your rotation while leveling, most of what you'll get will be your off-global abilities and your utility. This can result in the job feeling increasingly stale for some the more you play it. Your rotation can also be subject to a small, but not unmanageable amount of RNG. Red Mage does utilize some proc-based abilities in their rotation, and while there are ways to guarantee these procs, you still might notice some inconsistencies on a pull-to-pull basis. And while the job does have a fairly simple playstyle, making mistakes can be very costly. In particular, you'll want to keep a close eye on balancing your mana gauge, and also try not to get too trigger-happy with raising fallen comrades. Although that being said, if you run out of MP from having to raise too much, then you probably have bigger problems going on. But I think I've beat around the bush for long enough. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the Red Mage rotation looks like. As Red Mage is primarily a magical DPS, it only makes sense to talk about their spells first. Your primary filler spell for a single target will be Jolt 2, or Jolt if you're a lower level. This spell deals light damage, and also generates a small amount of both black and white mana, which we'll talk about in just a moment. You'll follow this up with either Ver Thunder or Ver Arrow, which will both generate a large chunk of black or white mana respectively. That being said, you're probably looking at those long cast times and wondering how you'll ever be able to get those off. This is where Dual Cast comes into play. This is a passive ability that makes it so that whenever you successfully cast any spell, the follow-up spell will have its cast time completely removed. However, you won't always be starting with Jolt. Every now and then, you'll get a proc from Ver Thunder or Ver Arrow, which will be Ver Fire ready or Ver Stone ready, respectively. These spells will deal just a bit more damage than Jolt, but will also overall generate more black or white mana, so you should definitely be prioritizing these whenever they're available. For AoE, your spell rotation is pretty simple. You'll open up with either Ver Thunder 2 or Ver Arrow 2, and then follow up with Impact or Scatter depending upon your level. No procs to worry about here. Much like their single target variations, Ver Thunder 2 and Ver Arrow 2 will generate strictly black and white mana, whereas Impact will generate a small amount of both. Now that we've talked about how to fill up the mana gauge, let's talk about how to use it and move on to Red Mage's weapon skills. First off, you'll have a 3-part single target weapon combo, which will include Riposte, Zwerchao, and Redoublement in that order. For AoE, you'll have Moulinet, and you'll also have access to Reprise when you're on the move. That being said, all of these abilities do pretty low damage and have a fairly long global cooldown attached to them. This is where your mana gauge comes into play. Once you've generated enough black and white mana, this will enchant all of your weapon skills, greatly increasing their damage and also shortening their recast time. Except for Reprise, which instead of getting a shorter GCD, gets a much needed upgrade to its range. However, these enchanted weapon skills are also where Red Mage's secondary resource comes into play, the mana stacks. For each individual hit of your single target melee combo, or every time you use Enchanted Moulinet, you'll generate 1 mana stack for each weapon skill used, capping off at 3 total. You'll need a minimum of 50 black and white mana to use your single target melee combo, as well as a minimum of 60 of each in order to use 3 Enchanted Moulinets. Once you've built up 3 mana stacks, you can then launch into what I call the spell combo. Ver Thunder and Ver Arrow will transform into Ver Flare and Ver Holy, spells that will deal high damage and also can act as AoE.
These also generate black and white mana, I didn't forget.
In addition, these spells will also guarantee you a Ver Fire or Ver Stone proc if you use the one that matches the lower of your 2 mana. Regardless of which spell you use, they will both then combo into Scorch, which will deal even higher damage, as well as generate a small amount of black and white mana. And at level 90, this will then combo even further into Resolution, a very powerful line AoE that will, yep, you guessed it, generate a small amount of black and white mana. And from there, it's mostly lather, rinse, repeat, with you going back to generating resources until you're once again ready to jump into your next round of melee and spell combos. But of course, Red Mage also has several off-global abilities that you'll want to be using as well. First off, we have Flesh and Contra Sixt. These are pretty simple, they just deal damage to your target with Contra dealing AoE damage. You should be using these every time they're off cooldown. Following this, we have Core, Displacement, and Engagement. All 3 abilities have 2 charges, although those 2 charges are shared between Displacement and Engagement. Core will allow you to gap close to your target, dealing a small amount of damage, whereas Displacement will allow you to backstep from your target, while also dealing a small amount of damage. Engagement deals the same amount of damage as Displacement, minus the backstep, so you should always use this ability instead if you'd rather not move, or if you just don't think it's safe to. Next up, we have Acceleration. This ability can store up to 2 charges, and, when used, will make certain spells instant cast with a bonus effect. For Ver Thunder and Ver Arrow, this will guarantee a proc of Ver Fire or Ver Stone ready for the spell, whereas for Impact it will simply increase potency by 50. The best use of this ability will depend upon your own discretion, as it is a very useful movement tool or good for handling bad proc RNG. Red Mage also has a personal DPS ability in the form of Manification. When activated, this ability will generate a flat 50 black and white mana, allowing you to immediately jump into a melee combo. However, on top of that, it will also generate up to 6 stacks of Magnification depending upon your level. Each time you use a magical spell or weapon skill, this will consume 1 stack to increase that ability's damage by 5%. You will need to be careful about when you use it, though. Activating it in the middle of a spell or melee combo will cancel the combo out. There is, however, one caveat to this. Since your spell combo is treated as a separate combo due to the mana stacks, you can actually activate Magnification after finishing your melee combo, allowing you to jump right into another melee combo after using Resolution. And last but not least are the utility tools in Red Mage's kit. First off, you'll have her Cure, which is a small, weak, single target heal. Ideally, you'll never want to use this, but it will still be there should you ever feel like you need it. And then of course is the ever-infamous Veraze. This ability, much like all of other Red Mage's spells, benefits from dual cast, and Red Mage's ability to throw out rays at a second's notice is part of what makes them so valuable for so many players. At higher levels, you'll gain access to Magic Barrier. This provides a 10% magic damage reduction to the entire party, making it very valuable for many trials and raid bosses. It also provides 5% increased healing to the entire party as well, which might not be a lot, but every little bit is nice sometimes. And finally, we have Embolden. This increases a Red Mage's magic damage dealt by 5%, as well as an additional 5% increase for everyone else in the party, giving Red Mage a very strong way to bolster the party's damage output. And that's honestly about all there is to it. Red Mage has a pretty simple rotation and provides some very valuable utility when it comes to party support. As I said early on though, this was meant to be more of an introduction to the basics of the job, so hopefully this simple little overview was enough to give you an idea of how to play Red Mage if you were curious about it. How do I end this video? Hey, long time no see. It's been a minute, huh? I'm going to be starting up TLDR 14 again soon enough, but in the meantime I want to try something a little bit different. If anything else, consider this a bit of a warm-up, if you would. That being said though, this is my first time trying to make this sort of content, so if there's anything you think I can improve on or that you'd like to see yourself, feel free to let me know in the comments down there. And I probably will do a few more of these. In fact, I already have one for another DPS job in the works. Not gonna say which one yet though. But that being said, I guess I'm officially back to making videos, so hopefully there will be more in the months to come, and I'll see you guys around a little bit more. I don't know what else to really say here, I just felt like saying something, okay? Okay. Later!